Good afternoon, and welcome to today's American Indian Heritage Awareness Month Lunch and Learn, brought to you by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council of the Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Use Services. Before we get started, here are a few reminders about the webinar technology. Please make sure you're using a computer or smartphone connected to the internet and the audio function is on and the volume is turned up. Please make sure your microphone is muted for the duration of the call unless you are speaking or asking questions. Questions can be submitted anytime during the presentation using the chat feature located on your control panel. We'll answer as many questions as time allows after the presentation. Closed captioning options are available for today's event. For closed captioning, select the closed caption feature located on your control panel. To adjust your video layout and screen view, select the view feature located in the top right-hand corner of your screen and choose the view that works best for you. Today's agenda topics include introductions and a presentation on American Indian heritage. There will also be time for questions after the presentation. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Kelly Crosby, Director for the Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Use Services.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Dina. Welcome. We're really glad that you're all here today. And I really want to welcome Dr. Frida Saylor, who is here as our guest speaker today. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Saylor. So before I turn the microphone over, I just want to share some introductory remarks with you today about Dr. Saylor. Dr. Frida Saylor was born and raised in Cherokee, North Carolina. She is a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. She currently serves her community as the Behavioral Health Director for the Cherokee Indian Hospital. A lot of us call it CHIA. The tribe has invested in healthcare that prioritizes behavioral health and substance use services for the community. Dr. Saylor has a Master's of Social Work from the University of Central Florida and a Doctor of Social Work from the University of Southern California. She's a licensed clinical social worker. Woo! Yay, social workers, and a licensed clinical addiction specialist. Yay, also LCASs. She's very passionate in working to end cycles of trauma and building up others so they can continue healing in the community. We are honored to have her presenting today for American Indian Heritage Awareness Month. And at this time, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, Dr. Saylor. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hello, everyone. Nagada Frida Saylor Adegwadona. My name is Frida Saylor, and I just said in Cherokee, hello, everyone. I am very pleased to be here today with you guys, and wanted to make sure that I wanted to bring up an initial question, and I don't know if we have an opportunity here for the poll. Just wanted to see how many of everyone here in the presentation today has either met or know a Native American or Alaska Native, however you define Native community, someone that you know. Maybe just give me an answer here.
Okay, we'll give people a few seconds to respond and go ahead and close that poll for you, Dr. Saylor.
Awesome. So I'm very pleased to see that about 93% have met and or know an American Indian or Alaska Native, which is awesome. And 7% haven't. So I think one of the reasons why I brought this up is, a recent, semi-recent poll showed about 40% of Americans say they've never met it or even think that American Indian or Alaska Native even exists. So I wanted to kind of bring that up for context. The other piece is about 36% of Americans feel like they have some kind of American Indian Alaska Native heritage as well. So I just thought that was a kind of an interesting statistic, and I can talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit in the presentation. So we'll move on if that's okay. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight this. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Awesome. So I wanted to highlight just a little bit, you know, the importance of history. It's very important, I think, when we're dealing with American Indian, Alaska Natives, Hawaiian Natives, in kind of where we come from, or, you know, as I said, I grew up here at the Qualla Boundary and in Cherokee, North Carolina, and you know, people's like, well, why do we want to live in the past? I think it's really important to acknowledge the past. My elders always said, you know, in order to know where you're going, you got to know where you've been. And I do truly believe that because we are living today um, with what our ancestors and the ones that came before us have experienced. And we build off of that strength, obviously, but we also understand where those vulnerabilities come in. I wanted to highlight, you know, the eastern band of the Cherokee Indian as where the yellow star is in the western foremost of the 100 counties of North Carolina. And we have several parts of our Qualla boundary in which we reside, everywhere from Cherokee County, which is the furthest, to here in Cherokee, North Carolina, if anybody's ever visited. We're the only federally recognized tribe in North Carolina, but there is 17 state recognized tribes in North Carolina, if you didn't know. And I think the important thing to know about this is there's 63 state recognized tribes in the country and about 574 federally recognized tribes throughout the nation. We
Dr.
have about,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there any way you can speak a little bit louder? I think some of our audience is having a hard time hearing you at the moment.
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Is that better?
And
Yeah.
then also, yes. And then also, are you sharing your slides? Because
Yes.
right now what we're seeing is the celebration that's going to be in downtown.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
Let me apologize.
Perfect.
This is what I was showing earlier. Can everyone see that?
Yes. Now we
Yes.
see.
Thank you. And so this is where the yellow star is in the western foremost counties of North Carolina, where we're located, the Eastern Band. And then it highlights the 17 other state recognized tribes here in North Carolina as well. So I think we had about 93% of our poll said that, you know, someone at least knows or has come in contact with an American Indian Alaska Native. And that would make sense. You know, in the state of North Carolina, we have quite a few state recognized tribes here. A lot of times in the Southeast, you don't see a lot of tribes because of the removal acts. A lot of the tribes were moved west. And so to have the Catawba in South Carolina and the federally recognized tribe and the here Eastern Band in North Carolina, and then the ones that you see here state recognized is the reason why you probably don't see as many, is because a lot of the federally recognized tribes are more out west because of the removal acts that happened, you know, in the 1800s or prior or after even. I do, as I mentioned, work for the Cherokee Indian Hospital here. I was actually born into this system, and a lot of us that work here as enrolled members, you know, serve about 12,100 of our members here, where we have about 16,000. The majority of American Indian Alaska Natives actually live in urban areas. So about 75%, I think a recent poll said that live in urban areas. I wouldn't determine that we live in an urban area. We're pretty rural out here, but we've kind of made our own ecosystem and our tribal systems of care out here. So we've really worked hard to be the solution for the community. And that's really what feels good. And if any, you know, whether or not the population here we serve a lot of folks, I understand, in DHHS and in social services, where my heart is the social work. We really have a heart for wanting to find that solution, right? And I feel like I've kind of been a little spoiled working in this system because we've been able to do a little bit of that and strategize what we can do for the community. So it's been very helpful in partnership with DHHS as well. Our mission for the hospital is to ensure the prosperity of the next 7 generations of the Eastern Band. And that means a lot to me because 7 is a very significant number. We have 7 clans. We work off of a clan system, and I'm Wild Potato. And so that was my mother's clan, and that's handed down from the matrilineal side, from the mother's side. And so if you're a male and you have a non-native mother, you wouldn't have a clan if you didn't have another tribe, or so you could be adopted into one, but obviously that is something that would come and be very personal to you. So we're really wanting to, we understand that what we do today is going to impact the next 7 generations. So that's our mentality, and that's our mission-driven work here. I wanted to highlight this in the spirit of speaking about substance use and also mental health. 40% of our user population has a substance use diagnosis. Of those 12,100, and 37% have a depression diagnosis. So that is huge. That's almost half of us, you know, in terms of, and even a quarter of us have depression. So when we think about the services that we do here and why we do them, it's because of this right here. It tells us that this is what the most needed service is in our community. And if we're going to ensure the next 7 generations of the Eastern Band, we've got to really super focus on this at from birth to death. And so we really are trying hard to do that for our community. I also wanted to, you know, just show what drives our work. You know, we're wanting to be significant for our tribal members, exceeding our the expectations of our customers, which is our tribal members, recognizing for improving the health of our Eastern Band of Cherokee members. Our Analinishki program is our behavioral health program, and it means they are the beginning. In our behavioral health program, we have various things from adult residential treatment to transitional living home. For men and women and children, and we also have a lot of community stakeholder programs in our schools, our jail. Our MAT program is pretty expansive and throughout, and we run an OTP or opioid treatment program, which is something that, you know, is not heard of a lot here in the western part of the state. Some of our guiding principles that we have for this, which is very vital to our cultural presence here with our community. And as a child growing up in this system, I didn't realize how important these would be to me as an adult in our work that we're doing. The first one is Uwashant Udantelan, and that's the one that helps from the heart. Basically says that, you know, we have to use our discretionary effort when we're helping folks that are in crisis, needing their health care, whatever it is, and we got to do it from our heart. We can't just do it because we're getting a paycheck, right? And because our community, we're trying to establish trust because of the historic traumas that's been created by systems throughout history, that we're really trying to build that trust with our community. And so this one is very, very vital. And sharing personal story in our behavioral health programs is very vital also, because it removes some of those titles and those clinical hierarchies that sometimes can really do damage in when we're trying to develop trust with folks. So when I use doctor in this this presentation, you know, I do it for other people, but, you know, in reality, most of the time I'm just Frida, because, you know, I understand that, you know, it's really important for people to know who I am and that I really care about them, and the work that I'm doing is driven by that. The other one is Tohi. In Cherokee, we always say that Tohi is when it's not just a word, and it's not a concrete word. It's more of when the water is got good rain, and it's Tohi, right? So we have we're not in a drought. The water's in balance, or when the weather's good and it's just enough mix of rain and snow and sleet and whatever those things that then we have a good mix of sunny days as well. So, you know, that's the Tohi. It's like a homeostasis when we're back in balance. Niha Tatele, it belongs to you. We also we understand that we want the community to know that this health system also belongs to them, and that we're a steward of their inheritance that's been recompensed from treaties of the federal government for all the atrocities that has happened against Native people. that healthcare was the one thing that we were afforded in order to be able to understand that our healthcare it belongs to us, and that our investment and the use and trust in the system has to come from the community in order for us to sustain. The fourth guiding principle is Digwadeyu Eat Lusti, and that is like family to me. We also want our community to know and feel that we are like family, so that way we have influence on what they do next in their health care, because I'm going to listen to the people that care about me and have the most influence in my life to take that high blood pressure medication, or to get MAT or medication assisted treatment if I need it. And so we want the community to feel like they're like our like we're like their family, and we really truly do care. I think the benefits of learning more about American Indian, Alaska Native populations, whether they're state, federal, or otherwise, because a lot of our children were also adopted out earlier in the 1800s and the 1900s, and people really, I mean, that 36% of people believing they have lineage has a lot of, probably could have a lot of merit. I do think that in Native communities, there's a huge stigma around it. When someone says my great great grandmother is full-blooded Cherokee, which I heard all my life, it really, for a lot of Native communities, it doesn't necessarily sit well because of the harms that's been caused, and people really trying to a culture appropriate, if you will, a culture as well, which doesn't always sit well. I think as American Indian, Alaska Natives, we always encourage people when they're learning more, maybe not to generalize. When I grew up, I had some language. My grandmother was a fluent speaker, and I heard the language. I didn't learn the language, and some would argue during the boarding school era whether or not they wanted, a lot of this language was lost because they weren't able to speak their own language. If they've got, my grandmother was a boarding school survivor, and so they got beaten, and they were treated poorly or worse if they spoke their own language. A lot of them had their hair cut off, so a lot of their culture stripped. In addition to not wanting to hand those things down to their grandchildren and their children because they knew that it had created harm for them at some level as well for some, or they just wouldn't speak it because they had this fear. So a lot of that stuff didn't get handed down. So I always say don't generalize that all natives or any culture knows or has the same history as another. I think when someone says, who are you? I'll say I'm Cherokee. I may not say I'm Native American or I'm Alaska Native, but I know that that's how the broader communities serve us, or understand us to identify. But I'll say I'm Cherokee, and if you speak to someone that is from the Navajo Nation, they might say I'm Navajo, or they may even identify as their clan if they know a little bit more. So I would just say be interested in how that person wants to identify themselves, and just be curious. And obviously my experience with my culture may not be the same experience for someone else as well. Some people may be just getting reintroduced to their culture and trying to figure out what that looks like for them now. The other thing is to understand some of the disparities that we have, but don't let that be our narrative and what we live with, because ultimately we have been through so much. And the biggest narrative is that we're still here, and how resilient we are as a people. I think that's the other piece, is to bring some of those things in, and really try to be just curious about why there is 40% or why there's 37% of depression and anxiety and substance use in our communities, and try to figure out, what your role is in that, and how we can start to just change some of those narratives that, yeah, we have that, but we're still here. And the things that, I understood that my ancestors had been through to even get us here has been like, it's amazing to me that we are still here. And I really draw from that strength, and many other Native people do too. The other thing is, I know a lot of people always ask me, well, what do you use? Do you use American Indian, Alaska Native? And again, I spoke to that just a moment ago about using, Native American, Alaska Native. And of course, I think Alaska Natives and Hawaiian Natives like to be identified as such as well. So, not to leave them out. And some people say, well, are you indigenous? And I'll use that term too. Obviously, some of us will use some slang, such as, oh, I'm Indian. We'll say Indian, but we'll say that to each other a lot of the times. So I think that just really trying to figure out, where other people are in their comfort level, and maybe just ask them how they want to be identified, and they'll let you know that. I think a lot of people may be also familiar with the missing and murdered Indigenous relatives or people or women's movement. And I think a lot of the times historically, Native women have been over-sexualized in the social scenes and in movies and media. And I think it's really important just to make sure that we understand that American Indians or Alaska Natives, however you're defining the population, really we don't live in teepees. We live in homes. We work jobs. We're still here ultimately is what the biggest narrative is. And a lot of the media and movies don't depict. We're just like you. We work, we live in the communities, we live in homes, we go to schools, we play sports, we do all the things everybody else does. The other thing I think that is distinct sometime in a lot of Native communities is that we have a huge calling around being collective. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the collectivism of like someone gets sick in this community, a lot of people will gather around and they'll do benefit dinners and they'll really support the families, and instead of having an individualistic approach to things, it really is it really is a collective approach, and we really show up to sports. Footballs, I mean, we may, football, stickball, all those things, we may run, we'll take a whole crowd of people with us, and we just show up and show out for folks, because it's just amazing to be able to pull together as a community. And that's a little different than, too than maybe what others see about what can I do and what can be good for me. It's sometimes what is good for the community is more of the approach and the viewpoint of the way we approach things sometimes. And I really draw from that strength too. It just feels great to belong. And in any community, that would feel great just to belong. And I think that works well here when we're trying to treat depression, anxiety, and substance use in our communities, because we're able to really draw on those strengths, foster community, which therefore fosters healing, which is pretty powerful. I think the other thing is I have on here is avoid cultural appropriation. I know in like the mainstream media that we really want American Indian, Alaska Natives to be used instead of someone else. That's not that when those roles are depicted. The other piece is if you have a Native person in your wheelhouse, in your organization, in your community, let them tell their own story. I really, really appreciate being asked to come and do this presentation. I have had experiences where someone else has chose to tell my story. And it feels a certain way when someone, when we have the opportunity to speak up and speak our own stories. I feel it brings so much power and visualization to the communities and to the larger population that we are still here. And the biggest thing is that we can also tell our own stories, and we're a powerful, resilient people that really draw from those strengths. I think there's an opportunity also to learn, and we do have, you've seen the slide earlier around the North Carolina Museum of History and their list of events. I think the 22nd and 23rd, a lot of those events are happening. I also would encourage you, if you don't have that, to take it upon yourself to research some of the history and get the true history and what's happened. And I think it will help you understand the historic grief and trauma that sometimes can come forward in these Native communities and in other communities as well, that it would be applicable to, and just trying to understand, like, where do you go to from here? I always encourage you to visit a American Indian, Alaska Native community and go to sporting events and go to community events. And that's the best place, even as employees, that we have a lot of employees that are not from this community, And that's what I encourage them to do, to be present, and they learn so much. And, you know, we're very, I know here in Cherokee, we've always walked between two worlds a lot of the times, you know, we've been very open to a lot of non-natives coming in and working here, and just you know, as long as they're willing to learn, we've been very open to that, and have a lot of allies everywhere. I'm sorry, I have research history on here twice, but it must be that important. And I always say, when in doubt, also ask. We also have a museum here in Cherokee, and there we've got a lot of good cultural specialists that like to answer a lot of curious questions. And I always say there's no dumb question, because you can learn. And if we get the opportunity to educate and to help the community become more knowledgeable about Native communities, I feel like there's a lot to learn here, and to garner from your own families or your community or your work about how we approach our work. And the biggest thing is be human, and when in doubt, ask, because we'll learn a lot about any population that we're serving, as long as we're willing to be humble and do that. And I will say shki, and that means thank you. And I will now ask if there's any other questions that people may have.
I just want to say thank you, Dr. Saylor, for coming and presenting and telling your story. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. So we'll take any questions in the chat. So if you have any questions, just enter in the chat and we'll get it to Dr. Saylor.
I would say there's 17 state recognized tribes here in North Carolina and one federally recognized tribe. Sure. And we've recently titled Beauty for Ashes Gagwotiyu, which means it is sacred. It is one of our Cherokee language is very descriptive. So it's not like it's a rock. We would actually describe the rock as being bumpy rather than smooth, or large rather than being small in one of our words. And so our Gagwotiyu program says it is sacred. So the space is sacred, the time is sacred. And we understand that there's a few components that heal trauma in our community. And one of the programs we run is Gagwotiyu, and it's for those 18 and up, typically 21 and up, because it requires a lot of processing, where we come in and talk about the trauma that's happened. And we do that by using the modality of storytelling. And our CEO for the organization gets up and tells the first story of his childhood in the area where breaking the silence. And then I get up and I'll tell the second one, typically around the heart of responding. So responses that I did not get when I was a child, that I needed. And I'll tell a few scenes of my story growing up as a person also of lived experience. And Kelly, I've seen your introduction and I really honor that, where, you know, I tell those hard stories and my community members get to hear those stories, and then go to a small, safe learning circle where they get to express how that showed up for them, and they get to share at their level that they're comfortable. And then we go into the harm that was caused to us, child sexual abuse, domestic violence, living without safety, and the things we needed from our parents that or caregivers that we didn't necessarily get. And we do this over like a 5-day period. We wrap therapists around on the outskirts and throughout the day and overnight, and we just sit with folks and we just stay down in those areas for a few days. And we don't necessarily try to rescue people. And it's pretty intense, but it's very rewarding. And then we come out on Wednesday and Thursday talking about anger and shame and what it's cost us, how we show up to those family members now because of all of those things, and what forgiveness looks like, and then what our path is going forward. It's very powerful. And you know, I think some of our last statistics says it decreases trauma symptomology by half after 12 months. I've heard people tell me I've been in therapy for 17 years and never got this far. And I don't know how many people's told me that. And so it's just very powerful to be able to use our own stories and to be able to heal and then teach others how to help heal. Because, sometimes even though I'm a therapist, I say there's not a therapist for that. And it uses a peer-led learning circle model. And then we foster community after that, and just accept people for where they're at, for all the harms that's happened to them and the harms that they've experienced and done to others too. So pretty powerful. Well, I would say that we're part of the USET set of tribes, which is the Southeastern tribes. And they come together a few times a year, several times a year, and they're part of a membership. And then we also have, there's 3 Cherokee tribes, actually. There's this one, there's the Gadua tribe out in Oklahoma, and then we have the Cherokee Nation tribe, which is one of the larger tribes in America. So there were some of the ones that were opted to go or forced to be removed back in the early 1800s. And so there are family members too out there. I'm not an expert here in terms of how federally recognized tribes are different than state. I think there's a certain criteria. I would say that American Indian tribes are probably the only people that are kind of closely looked at as kind of like and I hate to say this in a negative connotation, but it does highlight the how that was brought up around, like, and I hate to say, like, the breed of a dog. And so I I really hate that it's like that, and that we have to have some kind of certification or some kind of pedigree or something that just kind of says you're this much Cherokee or you're this much Navajo. But that's for another conversation. But there is some kind of criteria that they push it up against, I understand, and I don't know all the details. Federally recognized tribes, yes, are eligible to use services like IHS. I think we here at this tribe can also determine eligibility for eligible members as well, or people that could use our services. So say, for instance, if we have a mother of a non-member, non-federally recognized tribe, or a non-member of Eastern Band, we would serve that mother carrying that child that would be an Eastern Band member. So that's an example of how we can extend eligibility in our services here in Cherokee, should it be determined. And I also understand that maybe that there's a set of federal monies that come to federally recognized tribes versus the state recognized tribes, which might get state monies. So I think that also comes into play when it comes to state versus federally recognized tribes.
So we have a few more minutes. So if you have any other questions for Dr. Saylor, please feel free to put it in the chat.
A little note for everyone, might be kind of interesting. My children play stickball. If anybody's familiar with like lacrosse, I think that is where lacrosse originated from, is stickball. And various Native communities throughout the country play their form of stickball with their own rules. A lot of times stickball is a way for us to settle disagreements with communities. We also maybe played other tribes, and we called our game Little Brother of War. And so it's a pretty rough game, but my children love it, and we'll probably play it as grown men as well. So it's a pretty awesome
That's
game.
interesting. When you were talking about stickball, I got curious and looked it up because I was like, what is stickball? So I
Yes.
appreciate the information that you shared about stickball. I was going to look it up after, like really look into it after the call today, but I appreciate that.
And if you ever want to come see some of our games, we usually have our stickball season. My kids start playing in April with their team and start practicing. And then our stickball season, it's a very spiritual game for us as well. So we go into medicine. So we have our certain rituals and things that we do in order to make sure that our men stay safe when they're playing the game. And so that starts probably mid-September or before, depending on what people are doing. And we really value water and what it brings to us. So my boys will go out there and play a really rough game. No helmets, no shoes in our game, no shirts, and they can't touch the ball with the hand is the only rule. And they will get marks on them from the grass. They'll get a toenail peeled back. I mean, they're 9 and 11. They're boys. They're rough anyway. And then they'll go to water and they'll rinse off and they'll do what they do there as men. I don't know all the things they do, and they'll come back and not one complaint from one of those little boys. And it's just amazing. I mean, it's a very cultural, spiritual game as well. And we play it the first week in October here at our fair. So if anybody's up this way, and we play it, and it's free for anybody to see and come understand. And it's pretty amazing if you like that type of thing. It's rough. It's not for the faint of heart.
Well, seeing that we don't have any other questions, I thank you so much for your time again, Dr. Saylor, and for being here. And like I said earlier, sharing your story, we really appreciate that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dina to close this out if there's any other questions.
Thank you, Brittany. And thank you for joining us today for the American Indian Heritage Awareness Month Lunch and Learn. We would like to give a special thank you to Dr. Saylor for this valuable presentation. The recording and presentation slides for today's event will be posted on our DMH DDSUS Community Engagement and Training site. The link is included in the chat box. There will be a brief survey following today's webinar, and we would appreciate your time completing it. This concludes our webinar for today. Thank you for attending.